I had always dreamed of leaving the chaos of city life behind, of owning a piece of land where the only noise at night would be the wind whispering through the trees. When I first stumbled across the ranch, I thought I had hit the jackpot. A deserted property, miles from the nearest neighbor, with rolling hills, old barns, and a creaky wooden fence that seemed to say, "Come on in, the land is yours." For the first time in years, I felt free. Walking through the overgrown fields, I could almost imagine the life I would build there. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun paint gold across the dusty earth. Nights spent under a sky so full of stars, it felt like the universe itself was leaning in to watch. I smiled at the thought, shaking my head at how quiet and perfect it all seemed. I had no idea just how quickly that peace was about to shatter. The first day, I decided to explore the property thoroughly. The barn doors groaned as I pushed them open, revealing shadows and dust, old tools and broken fences. It smelled like the years had passed without anyone noticing, a mix of earth, hay, and something faintly metallic. I stepped closer to the old well at the edge of the field, curiosity tugging me forward. When I dug a little, my shovel struck something slick. I wiped the dirt away with my sleeve and froze. There it was, a dark, oily substance glinting in the sunlight. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Probably just some old machinery leaking oil, I muttered to myself. But something about it didn't feel right. The ranch had been abandoned for decades. How could machinery still be here? And why did this feel valuable? My pulse quickened as I stared at the ground. I had no idea that what I had just uncovered could change everything. That night, I sat on the porch, staring out across the ranch, the wind tugging at my hair. I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. Something was beneath my feet, something that had been hiding for years, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I told myself to relax, to enjoy the quiet, but the thrill of discovery pulsed in my veins. I barely slept, imagining the possibilities. The next morning, I called a geologist I found online. When he arrived, he moved across the field with the kind of precision and focus that made me nervous. He crouched down, touched the ground, sniffed, and then looked at me with a gaze that made my stomach drop. "You're sitting on something significant," he said quietly. "You need to understand this could be worth more than the ranch itself, more than anything you've ever imagined." I blinked, trying to make sense of his words. My heart started racing. I had come to this ranch for peace, for simplicity, but it seemed fate had other plans. I laughed, nervously rubbing the back of my neck. "Significant, like money?" I asked. The geologist nodded, his face serious. "Much more than money," he said. "This could attract attention, from people you don't want on your land." For a moment, I let the words sink in. My perfect, quiet ranch was about to become something completely different. I had no idea what was coming, no clue that this discovery would draw in people with clipboards, rules, and more determination than any tumbleweed could muster. I looked out over my land, the golden sun spilling across the dusty hills, and I realized something. My life was about to change forever, and I wasn't ready for it. Little did I know, the first knock on my door would come sooner than I expected. And when it did, the smile behind that knock would be hiding something far more dangerous than the desert wind. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the geologist's words over and over. "This could be worth more than anything you've ever imagined." I stared at the ceiling, imagining what life might look like if this ranch really held oil beneath its dusty soil. A small fortune sitting quietly beneath my feet. My heart raced at the thought, but so did a sense of unease. Money, power, attention, they all had a way of bringing trouble. And for some reason, I had a feeling trouble was already on its way. The next morning, I walked through the fields, the early sun painting gold across the barns and fence posts. I wanted to see the land as it was before it became anything else. The soil felt different now, alive in a way it hadn't before. I knelt and let my fingers brush the dark, oily patch I had found the day before. The earth smelled faintly metallic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me back. By noon, the geologist returned with a portable drill and some testing equipment. He worked silently, methodical, and I couldn't help but pace behind him, my curiosity impossible to contain. Finally, he stood up, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You've hit something real. I've seen a lot of land, but this is different. You need to be careful. People don't ignore land like this." I froze. "People? What people?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His expression didn't change. "Those who notice this will come knocking, and some of them won't leave empty-handed." The words sent a chill down my spine. I had thought the ranch was abandoned, my perfect escape from the world. But now, I realized my little paradise was no longer hidden, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered, had it ever been hidden at all? I tried to laugh it off, joking to myself, well, if someone wants to pay for a slice of paradise, maybe that's not the worst thing. But the humor felt hollow. I was alone here, miles from anything, and suddenly, the thought of someone showing up uninvited made my stomach twist. That afternoon, as I walked past the old barn, I noticed something strange. Tire tracks, faint but there. They led toward the property line, stopping abruptly at the edge of the field. My pulse quickened. I had no visitors, no neighbors, and yet someone had been here. Maybe it was hunters, or maybe just curious kids from town, but a nagging voice in my head whispered that it was something else, something more organized. The geologist warned me not to say anything until we knew more. But by then, my imagination had run wild. I could see suits, clipboards, cars parked discreetly along the dusty road. I could see letters, fines, rules, people telling me how I could, or couldn't, use my own land. My ranch, my dream, suddenly felt like it was slipping through my fingers before I even knew what I was holding. By evening, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this discovery control me or anyone else. I poured myself a drink, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The land glowed in amber light, and I felt the weight of what was coming. Whoever came next wouldn't know what hit them. My ranch might be deserted, but I was. I didn't know who would come knocking first, or how aggressive they would be. All I knew was that the next few days would be critical. I had to prepare, to understand what I owned, and to stand my ground. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the first knock on my door would arrive sooner than I expected. The desert wind blew through the fields that night, carrying with it a promise I didn't quite understand yet. Something was coming, something big, and my quiet life on this forgotten ranch was about to be tested in ways I had never imagined. Little did I know, by morning, my peaceful dream would start to crumble. What I thought was a simple, abandoned ranch was about to become the center of chaos, and the people who were coming weren't here to enjoy the view. I thought I had a few more days to figure things out, a little time to breathe, to plan, to enjoy the quiet before the chaos arrived. I was wrong. It started with a knock, 3 slow, deliberate raps that echoed through the empty ranch like a warning. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not neighbors, not curious kids, not even a delivery. I peeked through the old window and froze. Standing there were 2 women, perfectly pressed blazers, clipboards in hand, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One of them wore a bright red scarf that fluttered like a flag of authority. The other held a binder labeled in big letters, HOA Rules. That's when the words hit me, Homeowners Association. I'd never dealt with one in my life. I didn't even know this ranch had neighbors close enough for an HOA to exist. And yet, here they were, ready to claim authority over my land. I opened the door, trying to mask the panic rising in my chest with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady but my hands slightly trembling. "We can't believe you're living here without proper registration," the red scarf said, her voice sweet but sharp. "This property technically falls under HOA jurisdiction. You'll need to fill out these forms, pay the dues, and comply with community rules immediately." I blinked. Dues, community rules. I gestured around at the abandoned barns, the dusty fields, and the tumbleweeds rolling by. "I think you've got the wrong ranch. No one's lived here for decades." Her smile didn't falter. "Rules are rules, sir. Abandonment doesn't nullify jurisdiction, and we've noticed several violations already." She tapped the binder. "Your fence is too rustic, weeds are over the allowed height, and most concerning, your land use doesn't comply with our community plans." I tried not to laugh. "You mean my desert ranch, where no one has lived for 50 years, has a community plan now?" She tilted her head, unamused. "It's the law, you need to comply." I felt a cold knot of frustration twist in my stomach. I had bought this ranch for peace, for freedom, for quiet, and now some strangers in blazers were trying to dictate how I could live on my own land. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to think before I acted. "Look," I said, trying to reason with them, "I understand rules are important in communities. But this property has been abandoned. I bought it exactly like this. I haven't changed a thing. Why am I suddenly under scrutiny?" The woman with the binder flipped a page and leaned closer, her smile sharp as a knife. "Because someone noticed you, and someone has big plans for this land. That makes you a priority." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My pulse quickened. "Someone noticed me," I repeated. "Who? Why?" My mind raced. The oil. Could they know about the oil? Was that why they were here? They left me their forms and a deadline, their smiles polite but their eyes cold. "We'll return soon," they said in unison, almost as if rehearsed. And just like that, they were gone, disappearing down the dusty road as suddenly as they had appeared. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I had imagined solitude, freedom, and wide-open spaces. But now I understood. This ranch wasn't just land. It was a battlefield waiting to happen, and I was standing square in the middle of it. That night, I sat under the stars, staring out at the barns, the fields, and the dark line of the horizon. The desert wind whispered secrets I couldn't hear, but I felt its warning. Someone or something was coming for my land, and it wasn't going to be polite about it. I poured myself a drink and let the silence swallow me, trying to make sense of it all. I had never imagined that buying a quiet, abandoned ranch would lead to this. A confrontation with a group of strangers, armed with rules and determination, threatening the life I had hoped to build. And the worst part, I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I thought their visit was a one-time nuisance, a formality I could ignore until they got bored and left. I was wrong. A week later, the letters arrived. Stacks of them, each more absurd than the last, jammed through the mailbox like a warning I couldn't ignore. Violation notice, immediate compliance required, failure to adhere will result in fines and legal action. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelopes spread around me like a paper battlefield, and laughed nervously. Fines for what? For existing, for breathing. The first letter claimed my barn was structurally unsound according to community aesthetics. I looked at the old wooden structure, sagging in the middle, smelling of hay and decades of neglect, and shrugged. It's a barn. It's supposed to sag. It's not going to collapse on anyone. The second letter was even worse. They claimed the weeds in my pasture violated community landscaping codes. I stared out the window at the tall grasses waving in the wind. Nature itself, apparently, was a violation now. By the third letter, I felt the panic creeping in. They weren't just sending forms, they were building a case, stacking evidence, and watching me. I noticed small things too, footprints in the dirt, tire tracks on the road near the property line, a strange car parked just out of sight. My quiet ranch wasn't quiet anymore. Every shadow, every sound felt like someone watching, waiting, ready to pounce. I tried calling the HOA, hopping to reason with them, to explain that this was my land, my dream, my escape. But every call was met with rehearsed politeness and vague threats. "We only want compliance," they said, "for the good of the community." Their voices were calm, but behind the words I could hear the steel. They were determined, relentless. The stress began to seep into everything. I couldn't sleep. Every noise at night, the wind, the rustle of leaves, the creak of the barn, set my heart racing. I imagined confrontations I wasn't ready for. I pictured lawyers, letters piling higher than the fence posts, my ranch slipping out of my hands. And beneath it all, the oil. The secret that could change everything and had probably already been noticed. I started documenting everything. Pictures of the barns, videos of the weeds, timestamps of the letters and mailings. I had never been meticulous about anything before, but this was survival. If the HOA wanted a fight, I would give them one, but on my terms. One evening, as I walked along the fence line, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. A figure crouched behind a bush, watching me. My pulse raced. I raised my hands in surrender, though I knew it was useless. Whoever it was couldn't hear me. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. My imagination, I told myself. My imagination and paranoia. But deep down, I knew it was real. I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, staring out across the fields. The stars were out, just as beautiful as the first night I arrived, but the magic was gone. Peace wasn't mine anymore. Every sound, every shadow felt like a threat. And the letters, the rules, the fines, they were only the beginning. I had two choices: run, give up, and let the ranch and everything I had dreamed of slip away. Or fight, dig in, and face whatever was coming. My hands tightened around the glass. I wasn't going to give up. Not my land, not my dream, not without a fight. And I had a feeling, a very bad feeling, that the next time I saw them, it wouldn't be polite visits or letters. It would be something far more aggressive. Something that would test me in ways I wasn't ready for. The wind blew across the pasture, carrying the scent of dust and oil, whispering that my quiet life was over. I looked at the horizon and whispered to myself, "Bring it on." After days of letters, fines, and that constant feeling of being watched, I realized something important. This wasn't going to stop on its own. The HOA wasn't going to forget about me. They weren't going to leave. If I wanted to keep my ranch, my dream, and my peace, I had to fight back. I started small. Research. Every rule, every law, every obscure clause I could find about property rights, HOAs, and land ownership. My laptop became my battlefield. I pored over documents, legal forums, and case studies, sometimes until the early hours of the morning. The more I read, the more I realized how absurd their claims were, but the more I also realized how serious they could be. HOAs had ways of squeezing people dry, of trapping them in legal nightmares, and I wasn't about to become another cautionary tale. I began documenting everything on the ranch. Photos of the barns, the fences, the weeds, videos showing exactly how I maintained my property. Timestamps, GPS locations, notes about the letters, the strange tire tracks, the occasional shadow I'd catch from the corner of my eye. My ranch was no longer just a home, it was evidence. And if the HOA wanted a fight, I was going to make sure it was on my terms. Humor helped me survive the madness. I would mutter to myself as I photographed the weeds, "Nature herself is a violation, apparently. Maybe I should start trimming the clouds too." Laughing alone on a deserted ranch might sound sad, but it kept me sane. But there was another layer to this I couldn't ignore: the oil. That strange, glistening liquid beneath my feet wasn't just a secret, it was power. And power, as I knew from movies and every story I'd ever read, had a way of attracting attention. I had to keep it hidden for now, a secret advantage in a game I wasn't ready to reveal. The HOA didn't know, and if I played my cards right, maybe they never would. Days turned into nights filled with strategy. I made lists, charts, and even a battle plan of sorts. When the HOA inevitably returned, I would be ready. I would have answers, proof, and a way to show them that this ranch was mine. The thought of finally standing my ground made my chest tighten in a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Then the shadows started appearing again. Not just tire tracks or footprints, but glimpses of movement at the edge of the property. I caught a silhouette slipping behind a tree, crouching, watching. My pulse jumped. My ranch wasn't just under threat from letters anymore, it was under surveillance. Whoever they were testing me. They were probing, seeing how far they could push before I reacted. And I realized something: I couldn't just react, I had to act first. One evening, I sat on the porch, staring at the horizon. The sunset painted the fields orange, gold, and deep crimson, but I barely noticed. I was planning, imagining scenarios, thinking about the first confrontation. How would it go? Would I stay calm or let anger take over? Could I actually outsmart a group of people trained to enforce rules and intimidate homeowners? I sipped my drink, letting the cool liquid calm my nerves, and made a silent promise to myself. No one was taking this ranch. Not letters, not fines, not threats, not even the shadows lurking at the edge of my property. I owned this land, and I would defend it. And when the HOA came back, and I knew they would, I would be ready. I didn't know exactly how it would end. I didn't know who would show up first or what tricks they might have. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to back down. My dream, my freedom, and my ranch were worth fighting for. And I had a plan, a secret advantage, and the stubbornness of a man who had finally realized what he was fighting for. The wind blew across the fields that night, carrying with it the promise of confrontation. I could feel it in the air, in the dust, in the restless stars above. Something was coming, and next time it wouldn't be just letters or polite visits. It would be personal. And I was ready. I should have seen it coming. The knock at the door wasn't polite this time. It wasn't slow or hesitant. It was deliberate, confident, and filled with authority. My stomach tightened as I peered through the window and saw the HOA again, but this time, more than just 2 women. There were 6 of them, clipboards, cameras, and not-so-subtle smiles that made my blood run cold. I opened the door, trying to project calm, though my heart was hammering in my chest. "Good evening," I said, forcing a smile. "Can I help you?" The woman with the red scarf stepped forward. Her smile was polite, but her eyes were sharp. "We thought we'd check in again," she said smoothly. "It's important that you understand the rules. Compliance is non-negotiable." I raised an eyebrow. "Check in. Last I checked, I own this land, and rules don't exactly apply to deserted ranches from 50 years ago." Her smile didn't waver. "Ownership comes with responsibilities," she said, "and responsibilities are enforced." I realized then that words weren't going to stop them. They expected fear. They expected me to cower. But I had spent days preparing for this. I took a deep breath, feeling the wind sweep across the fields behind me, and I let them see that I wasn't intimidated. "Let's take a walk," I said, stepping aside. "I want to show you something." Their expressions flickered curiosity, suspicion, maybe even arrogance. I led them across the ranch, past the old barns, the dusty fields, and the fences I had carefully documented. I pointed to the sagging barn. "Structurally unsound?" I asked, letting the words drip with humor. "It's been standing for decades. It survived storms, winds, and decades of nothing. And it's still here. I'd say that's compliance enough." The woman with the binder flipped through her papers, frowning. "That may be true," she said, voice tight, "but regulations exist for a reason." I let out a small laugh. "And yet, nature itself violates your regulations. Weeds, dirt, dust, tumbleweeds, apparently all infractions. Should I start paving the entire ranch?" Their smiles faltered for a fraction of a second. I could see it. The first crack in their armor. Then I pulled out my folder, the one I had spent days filling with photos, videos, timestamps, and notes. I opened it carefully, letting the sunlight catch the papers just so. "Here's everything," I said. "Your so-called violations. Documented, time-stamped, and fully compliant with property law. Every corner of this ranch, every inch. You might want to read through this before making claims." The woman with the red scarf took the folder, flipping through it quickly. Her eyes widened slightly, but she hid it well. The others exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't stop there. I walked them past the area where the soil glistened, careful not to reveal too much about the oil beneath my feet. "I've been nothing but transparent," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This land is mine, and I intend to keep it that way." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. For a moment, silence fell over the fields. The wind rustled through the grass, the old barns groaned, and even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest, every pulse of adrenaline racing through my body. Finally, the woman with the binder spoke, her tone clipped. "We will review your evidence, but know this: compliance is expected." I nodded, keeping my smile. "I expect nothing less," I said, but inside I knew something important had shifted. They had underestimated me. They had assumed fear, intimidation, and compliance. Instead, they were met with preparation, determination, and someone who refused to be bullied. When they finally left, the wind carried away their confident footsteps. I closed the gate behind them and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The ranch was quiet again, but this time, it felt different. I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting back. and I could feel the scales beginning to tip in my favor. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The HOA wasn't gone. They would regroup, they would plan, and they would return. And when they did, the stakes would be even higher. I sat on the porch that night, staring at the horizon. The sun dipped below the hills, painting the fields in gold and crimson. The ranch was mine, but the war had just begun, and I had no intention of losing. I thought the showdown had shaken them. I thought the HOA would think twice before coming back. I was wrong. A week later, I found a letter slipped under my door, thicker than anything they'd sent before. My hands shook as I picked it up. It wasn't just a threat this time. It was a plan. They claimed they had community interest in the property, citing mysterious easement rights. They implied that the land, my land, could be used for purposes I hadn't even imagined. My pulse raced as I realized what they were after. The oil. They had found out. I felt the weight of the ranch pressing down on me in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about power, money, control. And suddenly, the empty fields, the dusty barns, and the quiet nights all seemed fragile, like they could be ripped from my hands with a single signature or a few legal threats. I paced the porch, the wind whipping through my hair, my mind spinning. How had they discovered the oil? I had been careful, cautious. But someone somewhere had noticed. And now they were moving in like vultures circling a carcass. My ranch wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a target. I decided it was time for a different approach. I called a lawyer I had met briefly during research, someone who specialized in property disputes and HOA battles. I explained everything from the letters to the fines, the surveillance, and the oil. His response was simple but reassuring. You own that land. No one can take it from you without a fight, and we're going to make sure you win it. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by tension. The next knock at the door came in the late afternoon. I knew before I opened it who it would be. The HOA. 6 of them, armed with their clipboards and that same practiced smile. But this time, they weren't here for a casual inspection. They were here for leverage. You've been very thorough, the woman in the red scarf said, stepping forward. But we're concerned about the resources beneath your land. The community could benefit, and we expect cooperation. Her tone was polite, but the threat was clear. My stomach twisted. They weren't asking anymore, they were demanding. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. I had prepared for rules and fines, but this was new. They were trying to exploit something I hadn't even revealed yet, the secret advantage beneath my feet. And then it happened. A figure appeared behind me, calm, confident, and sharp-eyed, my lawyer. He had come to the ranch unannounced, sensing the escalation. The HOA members froze, their rehearsed smiles faltering as he stepped forward. I suggest you step back, he said firmly, voice carrying authority. You have no legal claim here beyond the boundaries of property law, and any attempt to take advantage of my client will have consequences. The red scarf's eyes widened for the first time. The others glanced at each other, uncertain. They hadn't expected anyone to stand beside me to challenge them so directly. I felt a surge of hope mixed with adrenaline. My ranch, my dream, my secret, all of it was safe, at least for now. Humor bubbled up despite the tension. I muttered under my breath, turns out a man with a briefcase can be scarier than 6 people in blazers. The lawyer shot me a quick glance, trying not to laugh, and I felt the weight of weeks of fear lifting just slightly. Still, I knew the battle wasn't over. The HOA would regroup. They would find another way, another angle, another loophole. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I felt the scales tipping. The ranch was mine, and with allies, preparation, and stubbornness, I was ready for whatever came next. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows over the fields, I stood on the porch, the wind at my back. My ranch wasn't just a piece of land anymore. It was a battlefield, a victory in progress, and a story I would tell for the rest of my life. And deep down, I realized something important. No one, not even a relentless HOA, could take away what I was willing to fight for. But the night was quiet now, only for the moment. Tomorrow, the story would continue, and I had a feeling it would be even wilder than today. The morning after the showdown, the ranch felt different. The wind still whispered through the grass, the barns still creaked under the weight of years, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The letters, the fines, the constant shadow of threats, they hadn't gone away entirely, but I knew I had the upper hand now. I wasn't just surviving this battle, I was winning it. The HOA didn't come back immediately, and when they did, it was clear they were cautious. Their confident strides and rehearsed smiles were replaced with hesitation. They had learned something important. This ranch wasn't just property. It was a fortress, and I was no longer the easy target they had expected. My lawyer had stayed nearby, a calm presence that made a huge difference. Together, we had outlined every legal boundary, every loophole, every rule that worked in our favor. Every violation they had tried to impose crumbled under scrutiny, and for the first time, the HOA realized that bureaucracy could only go so far when faced with preparation, evidence, and determination. I walked through the fields that afternoon, my boots crunching over the dry soil, the sun casting long golden shadows across the barns. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that finally felt like freedom. I smiled as I passed the old fence, thinking about how many letters they had sent me over weeds and dust, and I chuckled. Nature herself had been on my side all along. But it wasn't just the peace I felt, it was the victory. The ranch, the dream I had fought for, was intact. The HOA might return, and they might try again, but they had learned a crucial lesson. You can't bully someone who knows the law, knows their rights, and refuses to back down. I leaned against the porch railing and looked at the horizon. The oil beneath my feet glistened faintly in the afternoon light, still my secret, still my leverage. I didn't need to exploit it, at least not yet. Its presence was a reminder that my ranch was more than land. It was power, potential, and a story no one could take from me. Humor crept back in as I muttered to myself, "Guess the HOA learned that you can't outblazer a man with stubbornness and a binder full of evidence." I laughed aloud, the sound echoing across the fields, free and unrestrained. The wind seemed to join in, rustling the weeds like applause. The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in golds and pinks, and I realized something I hadn't thought about in months. Owning this land had been more than a dream. It had been a test of patience, of courage, of wit. Every letter, every visit, every shadow at the edge of the property had been part of a story that I had to live through to understand what it meant to fight for something that truly mattered. I thought about the moments I had feared the most, the nights I had lain awake imagining threats and confrontations. And I realized that fear had been a teacher, pushing me to prepare, to act, and to discover a strength I hadn't known I had. The HOA, in the end, retreated. Their letters slowed, their visits became cautious, and eventually they stopped altogether. The ranch returned to its quiet rhythm, the way it had been when I first arrived, except now it belonged to me in every sense. I walked through the fields one last time that evening, watching the sun sink behind the hills, and I felt a profound sense of peace. This land was mine, not just because I had bought it, but because I had defended it. Every shadow, every threat, every absurd rule had been met with determination and clarity. I had stood my ground. As night fell, the stars stretched across the sky like a blanket, infinite and reassuring. I sat on the porch, the wind whispering through the grass, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. The ranch, my dream, and my secret advantage beneath the soil, all of it was safe. And I knew that no matter what challenges came next, I had the courage and the wisdom to face them. The ranch had tested me, and I had passed. The HOA had tried to take my peace, and I had taken it back. And as I leaned back in my chair, letting the desert night embrace me, I realized something important. Victory isn't just about fighting. It's about standing your ground, knowing your worth, and refusing to let anyone tell you otherwise. And in that quiet moment, with the wind, the stars, and the promise of tomorrow, I smiled. My ranch was mine. And nothing, not rules, not threats, not even the richest HOA in the county could change that. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.